What happens when the daughter everyone thought would be the most loyal becomes the one who quietly shifts the balance of power in her family? In a house defined by strict rules, deep faith, and constant pressure to obey, it was never the loud rebels who caused the biggest shake in the foundation. It was the silent one. Lydia Plath, the daughter Kim once relied on as her most obedient child, slowly began to rewrite her role. She didn't shout, she didn't storm out, she didn't break every rule. Instead, she simply set boundaries, and in doing that, she cracked something in her mother's authority that may never be repaired. Hi friends, I'm Christine, and this is Inside Hollywood Couples. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the bell, because we cover the stories behind the drama in ways you won't see anywhere else. And I want to hear from you. Was Lydia's quiet resistance more powerful than the open rebellion we saw from her siblings? Let me know in the comments, because your take on this family always makes these discussions more real. This is the story of how Lydia's silence became the loudest voice in Welcome to Plathville. To really understand how Lydia's quiet choices became so powerful, we need to look back at the way the Plath family first appeared on Welcome to Plathville. From the very first season, viewers were introduced to Kim and Barry Plath as parents who believed their strict household was the safest path for their children. Their home was presented as one set apart, with no sugar, no television, very limited exposure to the outside world, and an upbringing centered around conservative faith. That environment shaped every child differently, but for Kim, there was one daughter who seemed to prove that her rules worked: Lydia. On screen, Kim often praised Lydia as the obedient one, while other kids questioned rules. Lydia was shown singing hymns, smiling through chores, and openly praying for her siblings. She was the one Kim could point to as her example of success, the daughter who followed every expectation. And compared to the tension with older kids like Ethan, Moriah, and Micah, Lydia stood out as the good daughter. Ethan clashed with Kim over control of his marriage to Olivia. Moriah embraced independence through music and new relationships, and Micah chose modeling and freedom outside the family's bubble. Lydia, in contrast, stayed home and carried the role of peacemaker. Episodes highlighted her devotion. We saw Lydia leading worship at the piano, journaling prayers, or comforting siblings when conflicts broke out. She wasn't just Kim's loyal child. She was the bridge between the divided halves of the family. If Barry pulled away in silence or Kim clashed with Moriah, Lydia was often the one in the middle, trying to soften the tension. For Kim, this was strategic. By holding Lydia up as the faithful, grounded daughter, Kim reinforced her authority, showing cameras and audiences that at least one child still embodied the values she fought for. But here's the catch. Being the obedient daughter wasn't just about personal faith. It also meant Lydia carried an enormous emotional load. She became the go-between, absorbing everyone else's pain. When Moriah felt misunderstood, Lydia listened. When Ethan and Olivia distanced themselves from the family, Lydia was the one Kim looked to for reassurance. Even younger siblings relied on her as a stabilizing force. The show repeatedly showed Lydia's role as the glue in the household, but the cost of that glue wasn't always acknowledged. What makes this setup so dramatic is that Lydia didn't ask for the position. It was handed to her, shaped by years of expectation, reinforced on camera, and even celebrated by fans who saw her as the heart of the family. She was proof of loyalty in a family where loyalty was slipping fast, and because she was so dependable, Kim leaned on her more and more. That dependence became the very reason her eventual quiet resistance mattered so much. Carrying the role of the good daughter came with a price that was impossible to ignore. On Welcome to Plathville, Lydia was often shown with a smile on her face, but if you looked closely, you could see the strain. She wasn't just living her own teenage years. She was carrying the emotional weight of a fractured family. There were moments where Lydia cried on camera, quietly admitting how much she worried about her siblings. In one season, we saw her pray over Ethan and Olivia's relationship, asking God to bring healing between them and the rest of the family. At another point, she confessed how torn she felt, caught between wanting to honor her parents while also loving her siblings who chose different paths. These weren't just passing comments. They showed how deeply she internalized the conflicts that were never hers to resolve. Kim leaned heavily on this, Whenever Moriah stormed out or Ethan pulled away, Lydia became the comfort, the reminder that not all was lost. Kim even encouraged Lydia to take on that mediator role, sometimes in ways that made viewers uncomfortable. Instead of letting Lydia simply be a daughter, she became an emotional buffer between mother and siblings, between faith and independence, between loyalty and truth. For me, as someone watching, this part hits hardest. You can almost feel Lydia's youth slipping through her fingers as she shoulders responsibilities most adults would struggle with. I remember sitting there, thinking, she deserves to just be a teenager, to laugh, to make mistakes without worrying about being the family's peacekeeper. And yet, because she was so committed to being loyal and obedient, she rarely questioned the role. But the toll showed up in subtle ways. Lydia's tears, her long journal sessions, her quiet voice when she admitted how heavy things felt. All of that painted a picture of a young woman who had learned to hide her own needs to keep others afloat. And while it made her mother proud, it also created the very tension that would later push Lydia to make a change. Because no matter how devoted she was, carrying the weight of an entire family was never sustainable. The turning point in Lydia's story wasn't a dramatic explosion or a sudden rejection of her parents' rules. Instead, it came in tiny, almost invisible shifts, moments that might have seemed ordinary at first, but spoke volumes about how she was starting to reclaim her own voice. One of the first signs was when Lydia began using her prayer journal, not just for her family's struggles, but for her own desires. On Welcome to Plathville, she opened up about writing down prayers connected to a boy she had feelings for. It was subtle, but groundbreaking. For the first time, audiences saw Lydia express something personal, something outside the script of being her mother's perfect daughter. It wasn't rebellion, but it was a declaration that her inner life mattered too. There were other signs as well. She started spending more time with her siblings without filtering everything through Kim. We saw her laugh more freely with Moriah, share gentle encouragement with Micah, and even admit moments of confusion instead of pretending to have all the answers. These glimpses showed that Lydia wasn't content to only exist as a reflection of her mother's values. She wanted to be her own person, even if it was in quiet, careful steps. Another shift came in her language. Lydia began talking about balance, how she wanted to honor her parents, but also respect her siblings' choices. That middle ground was radical in a family where the lines had always been drawn so sharply. For Kim, loyalty meant full obedience. For the older kids, freedom meant breaking away completely. Lydia carved out a third option, staying connected to both sides while creating boundaries for herself. What made these small shifts so powerful was that they didn't look like defiance. They looked like maturity. And because Lydia wasn't storming out or yelling back, it was harder for Kim to dismiss or punish her. Instead, Lydia's quiet steps toward independence made her influence even stronger. Other siblings could see it. Viewers could see it. And most importantly, Kim could feel that something was changing, something she couldn't fully control anymore. These moments weren't flashy, but they were the seeds of transformation. Lydia was no longer just the glue holding her family together. She was starting to build her own identity, one careful step at a time. As Lydia's small shifts became more visible, what stood out most was how she began to reframe her role, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. For years, the words she used were the same as Kim's: obedience, loyalty, sacrifice. But slowly, Lydia started introducing new language, and that changed the way the family story was told. Instead of talking about submission, Lydia began talking about boundaries. Instead of describing herself as carrying her siblings' struggles, she started using words like support, which didn't mean solving everything, but simply being present. It might seem like a small difference, but for a family raised in such a rigid structure, those changes in vocabulary were revolutionary. On camera, we saw her gently challenge the narrative. When Kim expected her to step into a mediator role, Lydia sometimes pushed back with grace. She didn't shout or reject her mother's faith. Instead, she reframed what faith meant to her. She talked about trusting God with her siblings' choices, rather than making it her personal mission to fix them. That shift freed her from carrying an impossible burden. Her siblings noticed too. Moriah, who had often felt judged for living differently, expressed gratitude that Lydia could love her without conditions. Ethan, worn down by constant battles with Kim, saw in Lydia someone who still cared for him but wasn't taking sides. Even Micah, carving out independence, respected Lydia's ability to walk a middle road without alienating anyone. By adopting this new language, Lydia reshaped how the Plaths and the audience saw her. She was no longer just the obedient daughter or the peacekeeper. She was becoming an individual, capable of honoring her beliefs while still acknowledging the complexity of the world around her. And because she did it without drama, her reframing felt authentic and unshakable. This was the quiet brilliance of Lydia's journey. She didn't overthrow her mother's authority with rebellion. She simply spoke in a way that revealed new possibilities. In a family locked into extremes, her gentle reframing created space for nuance. And in that space, the authority Kim once held so tightly began to erode. The ripple effects of Lydia's reframing didn't stay small. They spread across her siblings, reshaping the way the Plath story was told both inside and outside the family. For Moriah, who had long been branded the rebel, Lydia's acceptance was a lifeline. Instead of feeling like she had lost her sister to Kim's narrative, Moriah found someone who could bridge the divide. Their conversations began to show more laughter, more honesty, and more sisterly connection. For Ethan, Lydia's shift meant less pressure. He no longer had to defend his choices to every sibling because Lydia wasn't demanding explanations. She simply remained present, softening the harshness of Kim's rejection. Even Micah, who built his independence quietly through modeling and travel, felt the effects. He didn't need Lydia's approval, but her willingness to stand in both worlds gave him confidence that the bonds of family weren't entirely broken. And for the younger siblings still under Kim's roof, Lydia became a new kind of role model. They could see that loyalty didn't have to mean losing your voice. That small realization planted seeds of possibility, seeds that undermined Kim's long-standing authority more than any open rebellion ever could. By holding her own ground gently, Lydia exposed the cracks in Kim's story. The idea that obedience was the only safe path no longer held the same power. Through Lydia, we saw that quiet strength could be just as transformative as loud defiance. For Kim, Lydia's shift was more than just surprising. It was threatening. This was the daughter she had always trusted to uphold her authority, the living proof that her parenting worked. So when Lydia began carving out her own space, Kim couldn't dismiss it as easily as she did with Moriah or Ethan. Their rebellion could be painted as immaturity or defiance. But Lydia's quiet changes? They came wrapped in calmness, faith, and love, the very qualities Kim once celebrated. That made them harder to control. The stakes here were enormous. If the obedient daughter could step outside of Kim's shadow without rejecting her family outright, what did that say about Kim's entire narrative? It cracked open the possibility that obedience wasn't the same as loyalty, and that true strength might lie in setting boundaries, not in surrendering them. Kim's reaction, while subtle on camera, carried weight. You could see moments of discomfort when Lydia spoke in new ways, moments where Kim's authority seemed less certain. And behind the scenes, you can imagine the tension. If even Lydia could redefine her role, what would stop the younger children from following that path? And that's the big what if that lingers over this story. What if Lydia's quiet rebellion plants the deepest seed of change in the Plath family? What if her example, more than the dramatic exits of her older siblings, becomes the model for the younger ones watching closely? It's a question that Welcome to Plathville may not fully answer anytime soon. But one thing is clear. Silence, when rooted in conviction, can shake a foundation more than shouting ever could. So I want to hear from you. Was Lydia's subtle shift more dangerous to Kim's control than her siblings' louder rebellions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is just getting started. So friends, that's where the Plath story stands right now. A family once held together by strict rules, and one mother's authority is being rewritten, not through a dramatic explosion, but through one daughter's quiet choice to live differently. Lydia may not scream, she may not storm out, but her silence and her steady boundaries might end up leaving the deepest mark of all. And honestly, that's why this story feels so powerful. Because it isn't about a single big moment. It's about small choices stacking up, about the way one shift in loyalty, one refusal to play the same old role, can ripple out and change an entire family dynamic. Lydia's path shows us that rebellion doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a calm no, and that can be just as revolutionary.